So today's session is going to be a bit similar, but then we're going to, I think, more into creative practice and yeah, like I said, background in visual arts and studies that was also connected to the conservatory, but I did not have to have conservatory level of playing, which make my guitar teacher say, what, they admit everybody now? And from there, I made installations, performances. I worked for a while, actually with a Portuguese choreographer called Bruno Listopad. And then I moved to Brussels to work with a graphic design collective called Open Source Publishing. And I told a bit also about my trajectory yesterday, but they are a group of people who do graphic design with free and open source software, publish their work under free and open licenses, and they're very invested in these topics, these questions, and also quite connected to the communities around it. So they go to, like, for example, like developer meetings where people are developing software like Inkscape and Scribus and GIMP and things like this. And they also make their own experimental publishing tools using HTML technologies for print and all kinds of what I find to be exciting things. At the same time, I launched my blog, which is called I Like Tight Pants and Mathematics, which I'm glad to announce will relaunch soon. It's been 5 years, and I feel it's time for a new round of Tight Pants and Mathematics. This time more focused on music, I think, and hardware, and less maybe on software and code. But still with tight pants. And the name comes from the fact that at the time, so with Bruno, we were making these performances, and he introduced me to sparkly leggings, and it looked very nice and cool, I thought. So I would always put pictures of these performances online. And then at the same time, I was teaching a creative coding course, and I kind of thought it was not so cool, so I did not put the pictures I did not say that on the web. And then after a while, but this is so crazy. Like, why do you only show one side of yourself? And that actually, of course, there is no opposition in tight pants and mathematics, but somehow it feels like one. So my goal with this blog has also been, well, I say my blog, but there's actually 6 people that write. They're called, if I can remember, BNF, Glit, Jenseits, Tell You, and I forget one of them. But it's a kind of Pessoa kind of setup, if you get what I mean. So that has been this blog, and I think that's also, got me into writing, making a book afterwards. And I've been teaching in a number of art schools in The Hague and in Brussels, and workshops like this all over the place. Now, at the moment, I'm not a teacher. And so that you have an idea, so you can situate me. This is the group, Open Source Publishing. We used to work in a 70s office, the World Trade Center of Brussels. And we did a lot of things where it's also about back and forth between print design and web design. So in the end, we started really working also with web tools for print design. I think here we just we first made a web design and then a print design, which was a lot of work. Did collaborative typography projects, and this one is not with Open Source Publishing, but with Lorraine Furter. And then once I quit being part of the collective, I started on an individual project, which at the time I called Legal Advice for Artists, which is really not as catchy a name as Copy This Book. Luckily, Lorraine Furter, the designer, came up with this catchier name. It's a joke because on the internet, people all the time say, this is not legal advice. So I was like, I'm going to read, this is legal advice. But it's a kind of in-joke that's a lot less accessible than Copy This Book. And so, going this whole dynamic of, as an author, you have creative control over your work. Because of copyright, it's an important bargaining tool, but then this control lasts a really long time and is very strong. So for me, it also can also morph into some kind of censorship. So I have a lot of, I guess, more critical ideas about it that I thought were important to share. But there's also the really practical side of it where, like, as a graphic designer, for example, you'll be faced with the fact that you are dealing with text that you did not write, typefaces that you did not design, pictures that you did not take, people on the pictures, copyrighted works on the copyrighted pictures. Maybe you have the copyright over the design, but then you're also still dealing with a client. And actually, this also means, just practically speaking, as a creative practitioner, you also really need to know about these things. Also because people expect you to, since it's part, well, especially in graphic design, your clients, they expect you to somehow educate them in this field. In music, it's a bit different, maybe, as in, maybe your label will help you out more with these things, but they still, I imagine, will expect you to have at least thought about the repercussions of whatever you sample, of who you work with, or how you mix your songwriting credits. Underlying all of this is, of course, that copyright is based in a very 18th century vision of creativity, where there is a single genius that somehow is able to get abstract ideas, and these abstract ideas pass through them, and then with their unique individuality through their gestures, imprints itself on an original, unique expression that exists all by itself. I don't think that's exactly how creativity works, but it's the underlying idea. And so I started with a grant from the Dutch government, thank you, the Dutch government, making a first chapter and a kind of, so I made a kind of sample chapter. I don't know if everyone ever wants to do a book project, but I think that's a good idea. I got this idea from Ellen Lupton, who I downloaded a book proposal that she did for her book, Thinking with Type, and then she explained how to make a book proposal on her blog. And I thought it's amazing because she's such a famous, well-known typographer that she has this sort of, you know, inside information on her blog. I thought it was really cool. So I made a sample chapter. The advantage of that is if then you want to work with a publisher, the publisher will still feel that they can have some kind of input in the project, even if in the end they don't always have input, but it's good. I think publishers are if you come with a completely finished project, they feel a bit maybe disempowered. It's more handy, I think, to come earlier in the process, and then that also helps you because you're already talking to a publisher, and then it helps you to find your to give yourself a focus also, because you know that somebody, at least one other person, is expecting you to finish your book, which is handy for the mental in mental scenarios. And so we distributed this on an exhibition, and I still have lots of red pens at home. People could read it and comment it. Turned into a publishing project because I did find a publisher who was happy to work with me, my friends at Onomatope. And it's been great. Also, like yesterday, like they've been really forward thinking. Or Freek Lommehi now has his own publishing house, who I worked with at the time. They've been really forward thinking on like copyright levels. Copyright was really okay for them, the Creative Commons license. But if you've seen it, maybe the book, because I've seen it's been around, and it was the opportunity for me to make it live. That's what you say in French, but to do events around it, because I kind of like the old school, I got this from music, like I got the old school idea of like bands making a record and then touring, as in, it's not really like that anymore, I think, because there is this pressure to always perform and always be outputting things, like the Spotify algorithm more or less demands you do this. I remember Spotify's how do you call this, big boss being like, yeah, the artists have to accept things are different. I'm like, you make the algorithm, sucker. Like, anyway, but I like this idea of that you can work for a long time on a project, and then you also take a long time to make it live and do things around it. Because I cannot be on Instagram all the time, but I can, if I can then know that afterwards I will get back to a project of concentration. And so Did a kind of also performances around it, where I made a little software that I could control with a MIDI controller, so that looks like a DJ controller, but it's actually controlling the images. And we did some copy parties, so also that's a bit where the name comes from. This one was at the Gaieté Lyrique in Paris. And so people were actually, we also did one in Rotterdam, and people were actually copying the book on a photocopier. And then it was a worldwide pandemic, so we had to do a shitload of streams. And actually, the good thing is I had already done one because I was invited in Norway, and Norway is just as far as Portugal, and then they wanted to just come over for the weekend and fly back. And I was like, no way, I'm going to do that. Like, that's ecologically not a very sustainable proposition, but I would like to try and stream. And then I set up all these things, and then when it was worldwide pandemic, I was like, hey, I was much more prepared for this than I thought. So, but then the sad thing was that they invited me to Berlin to participate in a concert. So I did a concert with the Chicks on Speed, except that because one of them was the teacher in Norway, and then except that she really liked my streaming setup. She says, like, you're going to stream to Berlin. I was like, but there's a train that goes to Berlin. Like, I can go there. No, that's fine. I can come for real. And they were like, no, we loved it. It looked so cool. And so then I streamed, and it was a bit sad because then I was at home and I knew they were in Berlin and they were going to party. And I was like, okay, this is not really a nice setup. Anyway, it's been translated. That's interesting. Also, this translation projects like into I think traditional character Mandarin for the Taiwan market, and where I really did not have a lot of involvement because I don't speak or read Mandarin. But for the French one, there was a lot more, I got a lot more involved into it. And I did a little joke with a public domain contents where actually the French National Library sort of tries to tell you that you should not download these things. And they have a little checkbox. If you want to download it, you have to check. You're not going to use it commercially. So that doesn't remove the fact that it's in the public domain, but because you have checked the checkbox, you have a kind of contract with them. So you're probably, that's a bit vague, but you probably have to follow that. But then if somebody else put it on Wikipedia, then you're no longer bound by this. So I put it already very cheekily in the English version, and now it's like on the cover of the French version. It's Isidore Ducasse, or better known as Le Comte de Lautréamont, who was a symbolist poet who actually did a kind of reused a lot of existing text in his work. And also I think he looks kind of like a beau gosse, like a sort of early 20s hipster from art school that like I also sort of think it's nice how an image can sort of survive, because all these other 19th century dudes in the same book that this is from look very old and stuffy, and he looks kind of sexy today. So I thought that's a nice, yeah, I don't know why I think it's nice. I'll think about this. We did a kind of collaborative translation. And that's something, if you're interested about, we can talk about more about it, because I think it's very interesting. Opens up a lot of questions, like how you go about doing something like that. And also the graphic designers for the French book were really took the game, because if you see, Charles, has a computer, and on the computer you see a picture that was in the original book, and they redid it. For this version, because the picture shows how many copyrighted elements you can find in a space if you take a picture. And so they did the same thing, and I thought that was really cool. And something else that was nice is that we got to work with in inclusive typography. So I don't know if that's a thing in Portugal, but like I talked actually yesterday with your colleague, and he said like, yeah, it's a question we are asking a lot, like how can you work with the gendered nature of our language and make it inclusive, so that if you do, for example, you say a multiple of people, that it doesn't become male by default. And so here is a kind of graphic design solutions for this, or propositions for this, from a collective called Bye Bye Binary. And so, well, I won't be walking, well, I can walk with this, I can show you. But like in French, something can be inclusif in masculine and inclusive in feminine. And then this is written inclusif and then a little middle dot and v, and the typeface automatically replaces that with this sort of combined glyph to have a non-binary representation of gender in the language. So I thought it was really, really nice and some kind of cool thing that you can then come across working in another language. So yeah, that's a bit about where I'm from, kind of things I do, so that's not really music. So now I'm just going to, thought it was really nice to just do some short case studies of things that I've been, because the book, it does talk about music a lot, like there's references to the Wu-Tang Clan and to DJ Shadow and to David Bowie, so there is a lot of music anecdotes in there, and so I do have some music anecdotes to share, so I thought to just do some kind of case studies where I think the themes that interest me and that interest me in my book, like Copy This Book, you see them come up, and then and that might also be interesting food for discussion. So the disappearance of the sample. So in the 80s, so it's really interesting about the I'm already saying it's interesting, which just I have to convince you first. But there's the intersection, of course, always of art and technology, but also of law. And people, they kind of forget how much impact law really has on the creative field. So in the 80s, sampling becomes a technical possibility, and artists, they really embrace it for its creative possibilities. So you have albums like 3 Feet High and Rising, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, Paul's Boutique, that are really filled to the brim with samples. And at the time, it wasn't really clear what the legal status was of these things. I mean, the musicians, they were like, okay, we'll just lose little bits, that's probably fine. So these samples, they were uncleared. That means, for a large part, that meant that they did not ask permission. If you listen to yesterday's talk, you'll see that that's not really the situation today anymore. And in fact, 3 Feet High and Rising, together with most actually of De La Soul's catalog, it was not on streaming platforms until a few months ago, like the 3rd of March, 2023, it came on streaming platforms. Because our current legal landscape does not allow for this kind of music. So where they released it in the 80s and it worked and it got on the radio, our legal situation changed so much in the meantime that nobody makes music like this today. And De La Soul spent, I think, 15 years negotiating to get the rights to re-release it in the context of digital platforms. And so this is really like, there is just creative expressions that people are no longer able to make, that they were able to make at some point. So it's really interesting to see, because artists tend to think of themselves as autonomous, following their own vision and their own urges. And of course, in large part they are, but also it's really important to recognize up to what extent the legal framework in which you operate in a society actually has a big influence on what you make and what you can make and what you would maybe want to make. And so there was a kind of shifting point, or of course I imagine there's multiple ones, but there is Biz Markie, he released a cover of a song called Alone. Well, it's not a cover, so he's rapping, and then in the chorus he sort of sings Alone, he sort of sings Alone Again by Gilbert O'Sullivan. But I don't know, it's kind of like he doesn't sing it very well, and he doesn't sing it in the same key. It's more of like, it's for him, it's almost a joke, I think. So, but he didn't ask permission to do this before. He got a lawsuit and the judge destroyed him. He was like this, and it was a landmark ruling. The ruling started with "Thou shalt not steal," so with a little quote from the Bible, and the judge, they just sort of and even tried to see if there would not be possible to have some kind of how do you say, criminal case, which luckily for Mr. Markey did not work. Yeah, I don't know. I think that judge did not like rap music, and so the next album of Biz Markie, he called it All Samples Cleared. There you see the reference, but his career did not really recover from this, and it's led to a kind of chilling effect, because then all the labels realized, oh shit, because the record label had to actually remove all the vinyls from distribution and repress them without the offending song. So there was a huge financial cut for the record label, and so record labels got a lot more cautious. And then later in and then over time, musicians were still sampling like maybe small snippets and small bits of other music, and over time, because that's how copyright law, that's how law evolves. You have the laws that are written down, and then you have the law that is the case law. So the law that happens whenever judges interpret the law, and judges' interpretation of the law got stricter and stricter. And so up to a point that we know now that even the shortest sample of like 2 seconds is not something that is permitted, that you cannot do without permission. So in the US there is a famous case which is Bridgeport versus Dimension Films, which is by a 1990 NWA track 100 Miles and Runnin', and there is a 2-second sample of Funkadelic, and that they sort of implemented into the beat. And so the judge basically ruled that, you know, doesn't really matter that it's 2 seconds, you should get permission. And the European equivalent of this is Kraftwerk and Sabrina Settler's Nur Mir, which was produced by a German producer called Moses Pelham. And now we see Die Neue S-Klasse. It's a joke because the S-Klasse is a kind of car, and but it's that's her. And there is a sample in there of Metal auf Metal, which is a Kraftwerk track. So this, he sampled also only like 2 seconds, but he sort of wove that into the beat, so it repeats all over the song. It's kind of cool, actually. I should have put this with the sound examples. And this has been a court case for, like, they've been fighting each other for also 20 years. And it got to the very highest, and then one of the highest German courts, shout out, said that it actually should be possible. But then it ended up in the European highest court, and they said, no, very sorry. So sampling is completely dead, at least sampling without asking permission. And I read an interesting article by, I don't know longer, I try to find back who wrote it. So I'm very sorry, person who wrote this article and made this analogy. I'm just going to use it without attribution. But that it kind of maybe, what you could see as kind of emblematic to this turning point of sampling is if you take the two Portishead tracks from the records from the 90s. So 1995's Dummy. You have an amazing flip of a sample of Isaac Hayes. Now, I understood that it could actually put sound. I can see if this works. And then we mute it for the... I'm very sorry, people at home. What will happen is that there will be sound here, and will people at home still hear this, but not the sound? Is that how it works? When you cut the sound, everything will be cut. Okay, well, so I will, so people at home, you'll have to excuse me for like a minute. We'll cut all the sound. Well, I'll sing it. I'll sing it for you afterwards, okay? Just imagine it. But or look it up right now. It's actually, oh, people at home, look up sample breakdown Portishead Glory Box in YouTube. Sample breakdown Portishead Glory Box. Okay, there we go. We will cut the sound. So the first sample I'm going to let you see is so they flip a track by Isaac Hayes. So you know the Glory Box is the song that starts a little and then you have this sort of super like lush string orchestration, and that's actually both the strings and the beat. So really, the sound is from Isaac Hayes, a track called Ike's Rap. But then in the Isaac Hayes version, he's actually talking over it. So if you look, I mean, it's a really nice video, which I linked. I made an address there where I put all the samples. It's a really nice video where they see how they actually took it, because they sort of cut out some bits around from how he was talking, and they sort of really cleverly flipped it around so that it becomes a complete series of bars without Isaac on them. Now this was the 90s, so they were already having to negotiate this, so maybe this is also what made them question this approach. This was, I'm sure they paid Isaac Hayes for this. But then if you go to their next album, which is called Portishead, and then I'll just play the sample from there, so then we can go back to then we can give sound to the stream again. And you hear a vinyl, and you hear that it's the production sounds kind of old school, and you hear this thing, they slowed the vinyl down, they're scratching with the vinyl, so everything makes you think that they sampled a vinyl record, but they did not sample a vinyl record. They made this sample themselves. So they recorded the song, they pressed like a dub plate, and they scratched it, and that came. So for their new album, for that album, like, there are no samples anymore, but it still has this kind of vintage feel, but they did everything themselves to get that feel. And I think it's I don't know, it's kind of emblematic also of like how music now sort of works with like nostalgia, because it's no longer possible to actually use things from the past. But then if you look at today's music software, it's always about emulating the past. Like, there's so many amp modelers, microphone modelers, EQ, like all the plugins, they're on your screen, and they have these sort of, they look like, I thought it was so funny when I first saw that, like, they're looking like so you have some kind of huge 50s button that you are, we are actually broadcasting to the world again, or not? Yeah, okay. So, the world. I mean, I like it, because potentially, like, there is lots of people. Yeah, if we were even... So, it's all about emulating the past. So you have this, like, I don't know, you have some kind of EQ, and then you see this, like, a huge 50s Bakelite button that you have to drag with your mouse. Like, I think it's always really funny. And but you cannot no longer actually use the past, and I think you also lose something of the wonderful, like, there's a word for this when something happens by accident. It's serendipity, the serendipity of sampling and reusing old things. Like, I saw, for example, I saw like a kind of tutorial on how to make these kind of orchestral samples, like you hear it in Glory Box in the first example. So basically what the person does is they get some kind of orchestra music plugin, they write quickly some music, and then they record it, and then they slow it down, they add vinyl noise, and I'm like, yeah, but it's, I don't know, it becomes so much about this constructing the nostalgia rather than the actual fun encounter of multiple eras. Or another example, I read an interview with a deep house vocal engineer. Actually, there's enough that's actually apparently really a specialty. And what this person explained is that they have people come in, and they have the whole setup of like all the compressors and all the things really set up to emulate kind of older recording style. And then they speed it up, and so they're reproducing the whole process of sampling soul records for house records, but then all like this. So I don't know. I think that's a really interesting phenomenon, and it's really a result of the legal landscape we live in. Another phenomenon that I find super fascinating is the cassette tape, and this is what I think is a wonderful picture. This is the guy on the right is the inventor of the cassette tape. So none of the like there's always been audio on tapes. Well, not always. I imagine there was a time before magnetic tape, but the cassette tape, so like this sort of plastic small thing on which you put which is an invention of this engineer Lou Ottens. He is 91 on this picture, and Lou Ottens he worked for Philips in Eindhoven. And he came up with this format because it's a good compromise between it's sturdy and it's small and it's portable. The sound quality is not amazing, but it has a lot of other advantages. Like it's much easier to pass around a cassette tape than it's to pass around a reel to your friend. And also the machine in your house can be a lot smaller. And actually the Walkman became possible because of this. So it's an amazing invention. But when now it's a bit come back in vogue, and then they had a shared interview between the two of them. So the other guy is Thomas Bauer, and he owns a manufacturing plant for cassette tapes. And so when they asked the engineer about it, he was like, "Yeah, but the next thing I worked on was the CD, and then we invented the compact disc. It's just so much better. Like, I really don't understand why anybody would want to listen to cassette tapes today." And I thought it was really funny because he had an engineering mindset about it. He's like, "You made that, and now we made something better." And like, he was in complete incomprehension about this revival. And me too. I'm not a big fan of cassette tapes, but I do still have some at home. And I was a bit because I was always a bit dumbfounded by this. Like, why would you use a sonically inferior medium to distribute your music? Because you can distribute, CD quality music on Bandcamp, and you can even, if you would want to, you could distribute things with even higher than CD quality. Why do people go to such a crummy sounding medium, and also such an impractical medium? Because most people don't have a tape recorder. And then I started thinking a bit about it, and then, well, maybe it's not just nostalgia, because of course I imagine nostalgia is part of this, but also maybe in the kind of, for example, now we are doing this stream and we have to think a lot about, like, okay, if we put sound, we have to mute it because there is YouTube, and even if actually we are completely allowed under copyright to play small excerpts of songs because I'm talking about them, and it's not like a sample in a song, but it's like a quotation. It's a quotation in the context of a critical discourse. The same way if you would, for example, do a podcast and you talk about music and you play small parts of music, that would be, okay, maybe that depends a bit from country to country, but that would in many countries be allowed form of quotation, whereas sampling is not. Which is, of course, you can debate about this. It's just the way that law, that judges interpret things. So there is actually a big impact of the law on creation, and the more visible the work you make it gets, of course, the more visible you want it potentially to be. If you want to put something on Spotify or on Apple Music or on Amazon Music or on Tidal or any of these platforms, I think Google Music is shutting down, then you have to really think about all these matters that we talked about before, the matters that made Portishead start to make their own samples. Whereas if you make something in a small edition, because it's of course not only musicians making things in small physical editions, also you have the whole trend of micro publishing, where people, they make small zines with risographs and when you start to think of it, actually, if you start to circulate things in a kind of small, in this kind of small territory way, it's also a way of being able to go maybe a bit under the radar and to reclaim some of this artistic freedom, where you can feel more free to make the creative choices you want to make, not feeling limited by the always ever present algorithms that are checking if you used another bit of music. So that made me feel much more positive about cassette tapes, but it's still a kind of trade-off, of course. It's a trade-off that I imagine, and that will be interesting after the break to talk together about it, like as musicians, how is that for you? But I feel that that's a trade-off that as a musician you're maybe making, that where you know that some things you'll be able to release them on the platforms and some things you won't. And so it's a trade-off, like am I going to, how much am I going to let these legal considerations influence the things I want to make. And I want to go to another case study which is a bit related, like so Ishona, where now we move to Jamaica, and I'm not sure what the Google algorithm, what YouTube will do if we show this image, but this is the video clip, so I want to do it very shortly because I imagine also the Americans don't really like pornographic images, but this is a great song. So I think I'll tell it first, and then we can maybe listen to the two music examples. So I'll explain it first for the people at home and for you. So basically, Ishona, she made a, so you know the Ed Sheeran song Shape of You. Well, it's a huge hit. So, so this song, it actually uses a kind of, doesn't sample any specific dancehall song, but it does use a kind of dancehall vibe in like the instrumentation, the beat, and all these things. So basically, you could say he culturally appropriated Jamaican culture. And Ishona, well, she appropriated right back because because the Shape of You starts with without, you know, it has an intro, so she just lifted this and made the Shape of You rhythm. And we'll listen to it in a bit, but it's an amazing track. I really always like to put it on because you always see people kind of react like, what? Are you putting on an Ed Sheeran song? But it's also still a really well-produced song, and it's not, you know, and so people are fighting like, I am too cool to like this, probably. And then the moment when Ishona comes in, people understand, okay, it's not an Ed Sheeran song, and it's like, okay, it's a dancehall song, and I can actually also like this, and it's a kind of like release. The theme of the song is oral sex. So she says, I say equal rights and justice, enough ignorant people are going to cuss this, my pussy tight, cut up your cocky like cutlass, but if you want my head, my youth, you have to suck this. So it's a kind of transactional vision of sex, but there is, of course, it's of course positive to, you know, to counter the taboo that exists on oral sex in Jamaica, or at least for many people. And then we see actually there's a lot of male dancehall artists that released their own sort of what they call the correction, you know, then where they explain why they don't agree with this message. And, you know, so not only is it a great use of Ed Sheeran, but it's also a great subject, and it caused a good discussion. And what's interesting here is that it was a completely uncleared sample by Ed Sheeran. So she did not ask for permission because, as he said later, like she thought she was never going to get it anyway. But then you see that a bit like related to the cassette tape example, if you reduce your scope just to Jamaica, because Jamaica is not exactly tiny, it's a big place, and it has a huge music scene and its own music industry. And they actually, within that territory, there's actually use of music that's actually quite different from the way it works here. So you have the notion, I don't know, maybe you know, but you have the notion of a rhythm. And a rhythm is not just a beat, but it's like a combination of a beat and a melody, and that can loop. And if an artist releases a song, like Ishona released this song Equal Rights, and it was the first major song with the Shape of You rhythm, But then other people are also going to use the rhythm. So the rhythm, it gets its own fame. So if you are if a rhythm gets popular, people can dance all night long to the same rhythm, but it'll just be different songs with the same rhythm. And so it's a rhythm like R-I-D-D-I-M. So, and you can dance all lines to the same rhythm. And for example, you might be a famous singer, but a new rhythm comes up and you haven't not yet released your version of it. At some point people are going to be, okay, but we also want, we also want you on this rhythm, So that's a thing where you basically get the artists and the rhythm, they both have their own fame independent of each other, and I think it's fucking interesting and amazing setup because it's very different from like the kind of copyright here in continental Europe. And so in a way, her uncleared sample, it still worked. It just meant that it was not going to fly internationally. So we're going to listen afterward to the Spotify version, but it's a bit different. So she released a version on Spotify where she did not use the sample. So that's interesting that you can have maybe an alternative approach to copyright, as long we saw before that the medium was kind of where it was restricted new, and now it's like restricted to kind of to a specific subculture within a specific place. And I found the song, but I found it on Soulseek. There's no way I could have got it through legal means from where I am. And the story ends more or less, it's a more or less happy ending, because in 2021 she Ed Sheeran somehow found out that somebody had sampled his track and made a song celebrating Cunnilingus on it, and was actually kind of happy about this. I think he was thrilled. So I think he released. I don't know. I think he got into it, and he got in touch with their management and say, but we want to work something out. But I still can't really, sadly, I still can't find this one on Spotify. So sorry, people at home, but we are now going to mute, and we're actually going to listen to this example. So after the break, I'd be curious also to know if you have any experiences like this, where there's like multiple versions of your work circulating in function of like if it for where, and if it's on the mediums or not. Then like we're almost there. I have 4 cases, so we're third case. We're almost there. Another thing what I really find is very interesting is we have this idea that an artist expresses themselves in, we have this whole idea of moral rights also. So if somebody makes something, we should not interfere with what they have made, and it's important. So also there's of course this whole idea of cancel culture, and that people are quite critical of the idea that you somehow go back and change an artist's work to suit like contemporary ethical standards. And for me it's been quite, I must say, liberating as an amateur DJ to think about this and realize that, but hey, when I'm playing music by myself, it's not me putting something on changing what is on Spotify and changing it for everybody else. I'm just changing it for me and the people that are listening right now. So it's perfectly fine to change and censor and modify the things, because it will have no impact on the original creation. And I thought that was actually, I don't know, for me that was a kind of nice thought, the idea that then there can be many different versions of something and people can add their own. So what I always do when I play songs, I go on Google Translate and I go on Genius, and because I want to make sure that I am sort of aligned with the message of the song. And so and like the equal rights is a good example. I start with the dancehall songs. I'm always reading the lyrics because for example, there might be like some super blatant homophobia in there, and then I'm not like, maybe not this one. And I remember like hearing this song for the first time. So it's a song called Hafta by Heus L'Enfoiré, which is a French rapper. And the song is really, the lyrics are not, they're really all about, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get intoxicated, which if I'm not mistaken is what Hafta means. And there's no, I mean, the message I could like completely agree with, like that's cool, yeah, go out, get hapta. But then actually literally the third word in the song is salope, which means bitch, or maybe even slut in French. And I was like, I cannot just play this song and have like that word. And also he says, he really is, it's the first lines there, he really is like spitting out these words, and it's sort of like, I can't do that. So, and then it was such a like liberating moment for me to just find a vowel somewhere else and just copy the beat over and paste it, so that now when I play it, like you don't hear that word. And so it doesn't, suddenly he doesn't really make sense anymore. But he's also, what he's saying, he says, Hapta, stenda, I don't know what stenda means. Well, salop, te bois, it's like boîte, like so nightclub. Shotka, like cachot, I think like hidden. Tello, hotel, tekart, carte, like bank card. Midi, départ, so like leaving. Paris, Neymar, so yeah, I don't know, he's evoking rich soccer players now. Nasser, I think, Qatar, I think Nasser is the person who owns Paris Saint-Germain, the soccer club. Voiture, très rare, like very... so actually he's just saying a lot of words that have to do with party or money and weed in the next... weed and different kinds of weed and streaming, music, bootleg parking. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense anyway, so nobody seems to realize that I changed the word around to get because it says salbar. I have him say nobody listens, that hears that there's a word that doesn't actually exist. Is it important what the artist already intended it? Like how many freedom can I make? And also how much do I need to have to change of a song before I feel like I no longer agree with it? Because here I feel that I agree with the sort of message of the song. It's just that this sort of, that saying salop as the third word, it just entered, like it's just, like, you cannot put on the song and begin with it. So I don't know. I thought it just started me thinking as a small exercise as a censoring DJ. And then one thing that I find super interesting, and I'm sure that you all know much more about than me, is that now when I go out to the club, I all the time hear lots of edits and remixes of songs. So I don't know, I feel like everybody wants to do every song in a Bailefunk version now, and I think that's really nice. It makes me, I like that, but I know that, so you have lots of course different ways to reuse music. So you do a cover where you're not reusing the sound, you do a remix where you're reusing the sound, but a remix, traditionally you would have access to the original different tracks, the stems, and then if you do an edit, what you mostly hear in the club, I think, is when you have only the original song and you just start editing it and adding maybe instrumentation and drums. And you can do that without asking for permission, except you just cannot diffuse it without asking for permission. We already talked about sampling, and there's also the mixtape, which is another interesting thing where people use existing sounds, but they don't release the result commercially, and then they just hope that they don't get a problem. And I think the interesting part of it is that there must be like a lot of musicians spending a lot of time working on these sounds, but not being able to necessarily release them. So there must be, and so I'm really curious to hear from you also after the break, like how does it work? Like how do people find these edits? Like how do they circulate? I know I've seen that like even on the social media you will, even on the online media you will sometimes have, you'll have things that are not. There is a bit more leeway, I think, if on YouTube, but also on Bandcamp, than on places like Spotify, where you would not find these songs. But I thought it was a fun example. There's a song called King of Africa by Douster, which I did not know this song. And then I looked it up, and I could only find it on YouTube. And then I saw that it's been there since 12 years, and it has 1 million views. So it's a kind of, it became a song that people knew, but only on YouTube, because how it starts, it says, okay, so let's do it with the sound. People at home, sorry, with the sound. I think personally, but that's the value judgment on my end. But the reason, of course, this could never be released commercially is the Lion King sample, and then I found out about this through an edit by Lazy Flow, who is a Parisian DJ, and this is all on Bandcamp, and I find actually quite a lot of edits and remixes on Bandcamp, and I'm always curious how that works. I think it's also a bit kind of flying under the radar, because I'm quite sure that for most of them there is no permission. But they sell them, so which kind of also asks the ethical question of like, okay, but is it okay to sell a remix of something you did not make in the first place? And here you have a very funny thing. So we have a remix of a song that even itself has never been released. So I imagine Lazy Flow must have like downloaded this with a kind of YouTube downloader and then changed it. And it goes a bit further than a remix, because it's like you have the vocal mix. And so this is from Lazy Flow is the resident DJ of La Creole, which is a club in Paris, where I did not get to go this Saturday. Very sad. And so you hear a guy or a girl, I don't know how this person identifies, you'll hear someone like rapping over it in a kind of Vogue-inspired style. And I'll just let you listen to this. So I mean, and it goes on, like it's great energy, really nice. And this has actually become a bit of the anthem to that club. So it's like they play it at the end of their nights and things like this. And I thought it was pretty amazing that you have a song that only exists on YouTube, and then you have this edit, and and it can also not really be released on the platforms. But that opens up to another question, though. If you have to pass if you cannot make it legally work, like how do you make it? I am interested about the question, how do you make it ethically work? Like, for example, I don't know who Douster is, but I think Douster is a kind of bedroom producer who made this song once. And then, is there a way for Lazy Flow to somehow give something back to Douster, given that they're operating outside of the existing legal, economical, musical framework? And so I find that, I mean, that's a question that would be interesting for me to talk with you about after the break. And then we have a... From you all, your experience, so with two things, like, okay, do you think about where and how you publish your music in related to this kind of like legal questions? Yes, because some things you might be able to put out on certain platforms where you can put them on others. Or do you even already think about it when you make a song or when you make a composition? And then the other one that really interests me is like what what alternative methods exist to to if you cannot pass through the sort of existing economical legal system, how can you give back and that we have a system in which it's not so easy to just find somebody and pay them, because you're in this logic of always having to negotiate, find the rights holders. And for example, in the case we saw with Lazy Flow, he uses a song that by already itself is a kind of bootleg, so it would become very complicated. So is there then in these kind of scenarios some other ways of giving something to the people that you've asynchronously collaborated with? Because for me, reusing existing work, I like to call it asynchronous collaboration. Like you have collaboration which is synchronous because you're working with a group of people at the same time, and you have collaboration that happens over time when you use something without that person knowing it in advance. It's also like when you put your work under Creative Commons, it's what you hope happens. And but also in case of asynchronous collaborations, like what ways are there to give back? These are a bit the questions I have. So maybe we can just pass it around and everybody think we have enough time to listen to everybody's perspective on these questions, and then maybe discuss a bit more or go have lunch or something like this.
Oh, okay.
You're the closest to me, Fatma.
Yeah, so here we go. Well, it's definitely a lot of new things for me to think about, especially when I'm approaching this topic from a more label perspective, and possibly also as a creative myself. At this point, I haven't released anything. I wouldn't consider myself as an artist like this. I have some things to think about. Actually, maybe I will still ponder on my contribution to this roundtable.
That's legitimate.
Yeah. Can I pass it? Yeah.
So I actually don't use any samples on my songs, but I know that a lot of people are having issues with that because they are using services like Splice.com and then like Splice. Yeah, which basically is a subscription service that you can download some samples from that. And people are assuming that because they are paying for this service, they can use those samples whatever they want. And a lot of songs are being blocked by YouTube because there's copyright infringement there. Yeah. So because it seems that there's a lot of confusion between royalty-free and copyright-free. So I don't know if you can shed some light on the differences of this. Yeah, because it seems like people think that because they are paying a service, all the rights are already taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, I will come. I'll take notes, and we can come back to the end to me, and then so we can hear everybody's.
So for me, kind of the two things I'm thinking immediately are citations. May that be in a song, citate another artist, composer, whatever, but it can be like just a melody. It can be kind of an Easter egg, like hidden rhythm that's only if you really know the song you will know it, but maybe not. So I kind of sometimes do that while composing, but I've never published nothing, so I don't know what really are the problems of doing that. I don't know. I think maybe citations are okay, but only for a few seconds, I don't know. So there's that, and there's also covers, but not sounding like the original. I kind of like that, because sometimes there are some songs that I really like, but but I listen to them a different way, so I want to play it a different way, and I don't know what's the problem, what the problems you can have also with that. I don't know.
I think it also depends on, well, in the future, if I want to put out something in a more unofficial way, I think I would turn more to specific platforms, like on SoundCloud, for instance. I feel like it's way more freer how sound creations come together and out there. Whereas with Spotify, it's so official, and you need to even go through a distributor to even get there. Yeah, but I would still like to think that I'm starting to think of like steal like an artist, which puts the stealing in the front seat here. But that's not really the point. The point is more to be inspired by other people's work and, yeah, you put your own brain and creation onto it. So I think in the future, personally, as a creative, I would just go for it. Even if it would be sampling something from Ed Sheeran, I think I would do it anyway, because the impression I had from yesterday's masterclasses and today is that, yeah, like what you said, Rafael, yesterday, that it just depends, and it's you just have to go with it in good faith. And it seems to be, creativity seems to be just, it's really how you put it, and maybe it's more about how you communicate your justification after. So that's more of a personal creative aspect. I would just choose my audience more carefully. But as a record label, that's when it's a bit different. I would still, as a record label, I would still approach it from a DIY, in good faith, creating in the name of art, but I would stress the fact or enforce that if people create things that are based on other people's work, then to have a personal connection.
To the original author.
Yeah. Maybe, at least, yeah, maybe it's okay to create whatever, like in the creation process, to be as free as you want, and once you have something you want to share, then we can start thinking about.
And you see also a role for the label then to help in that process of reaching out and connecting artists. And
yes, I find that often that once you have a legal body behind it, then things become more official and people are more, it's becoming more real. And as a small independent label, I think you can have both of how do you say? Both of best worlds.
Best of both worlds.
Best of, yeah. That's some thoughts I'm having about this topic.
Cool.
Mariana, do you have something to say?
No, doesn't need to be on the music side. Can you also?
Yeah, so far I don't think I have.
Okay. Oh, we do. Well, this one is nice, and yeah, I actually have some things to say about this. On two different perspectives. Also the perspective of a creative person, on the perspective of a consumer, on the perspective of a label manager. And in one hand, I have a pretty extreme position about all this, and I read a lot about remix culture, and I appreciate a lot what hip-hop artists did with the samples in the beginning and now also. And sampling and the turntable was the instrument of people who actually couldn't afford to take instrument classes and to maybe buy these expensive guitars and stuff. This is the way they found to express themselves. And I think a lot of the times this was a very valid and very powerful expression. So I'm really glad that this was that they could use this tool as form of expression. I really believe that information should be free, and that as soon as you put it out there, it's out there. Like every melody, every harmony, every rhythm is always inspired by something you heard, even inside your head, no? Like that can be like, the most common example is the bird singing or what's not, and like the melody doesn't belong to the birds, it's out there. It's we were talking about quoting books, and you can quote a book, and we are building on a discourse that already exists. We don't build anything from scratch nowadays. No, we are not isolated in some lonely island where we only with our thoughts and our contemplation of nature. We are building over a discourse that has been going on for thousands of years, and music discourse and visual discourse and theoretical discourse. So the same way that we can use a quote of a book, if we give credit to the author, I think we should also be able to build on this musical discourse that is already out there. So yeah, I really think this completely sucks that you can do that, that people can do that. And we were talking just about this because when we went to live in the countryside some years back, we were listening a lot to this record from Girls Talk that has, I don't know, maybe how, 1,000 samples from very big bands that for sure they couldn't get clearance for all of it. So we were talking like, how did they do it? You know, like, did they get sued 1,000 times or what happened? But maybe you know, I don't know, but this is a big, yeah, there is, no? So yeah, someone talked about this in some Masterclass before.
Not about this one.
No, I think it was Marcio maybe, yeah. And as a label, and for example, I usually don't put out music like on major platforms that is using a lot of sampling. I did a project called Dead Pirate Society that is just about bootlegs of stuff I liked. I was talking to you before about this. Just bootlegs I did of music I liked when I was younger. And I think this, like, I think no one will hear it on. I was doing under this moniker, Dead Pirate Society, and it's just about mashing up stuff that I liked when I was younger, like kind of rock songs with drum and bass and jungle and hip hop and hardcore. And I don't actually release this, but I'm still thinking on a way to do it, maybe on a weird cassette that I pass on in the dark streets. But there is actually some snippets of it on Bandcamp, just so I can show it to people like now. But as a label, for example, we've been putting out everything under Creative Commons license, and even, for example, we did a record called New Chronologies of Sound that was a collection of sound works based on field recordings by artists from all over the world. And we published also the collection of the raw recordings from each of the artists that actually agreed to this or that had interesting recordings to give us, so that other people can use these recordings for whatever they want. And I don't care if someone takes a song, my song, and does anything, even if it's a song I hate. Like, that's just them building on whatever is out there. And the fact that I did it, me personally, I really don't care. Even if it's the song I most hate in the world that was built on my own material, really. And for example, in the publication we published, digital publication, we published about like community projects in rural areas. Man, I'm sorry, I'm looking for this disclaimer. But we actually encourage people to copy, to remix, to cut up, and to destroy our work, and to share it in any way they feel. And I think attribution is very important. And I think, yeah, this anti-guide is published under an attribute share alike license, so that you may share, copy, and modify its content as long as you acknowledge its origin and share it under the same kind of license. We encourage you to copy, reuse, remix, cut up, rethink, and season it to taste. So,
would you feel like this also, like Eric's example yesterday, that you chose Creative Commons, but you still wanted to have control because you didn't want Nazis to, or something?
No, I don't really care about the Nazis. I think that's an example people give all the time. But I'm not so afraid of my work being reused by people I don't politically agree with, because I feel like, why would they? Don't think that's a very, I don't think that's a very likely scenario. No, it's more like the non-commercial for me was more like to have some creative control over it, but I don't think there is, I don't think it's always necessary, and especially with like you're saying, these field recordings, then I think that's really beautiful that you take your sources and you make something with it. And then it makes sense for these field recordings to have this really open license, because you want somebody to see what somebody else can do with it. And then maybe the specific composition that you made, you want to keep maybe some more control, or maybe some more also possibilities to monetize it. But especially if you're creating a kind of shared resource, that's also where the share alike license is really poetic, I find.
Sorry, Fatma, just to finish. I know I talked a lot, but I'm not quite finished yet. And I just wanted to say that this is where the middle way comes in. Yesterday we were having this roundtable called Copy Left, Copyright, Copy Left, and the quest for a middle way. And yeah, okay, so I don't mind if I make this song, and I don't mind if Eric or Mariana or Fatma takes it and destroys it and does something completely else, as long as they said, hey, this song originally was done by Hugo Branco, blah, 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 check it out. But if it's Coca-Cola or blah, blah, like, yeah, this I would like to get paid for. And when we were talking about this middle ground, is it possible to keep this, to not be too restrictive in terms of creativity, but to be kind of restrictive in terms of commercial uses? And so this is where I think Creative Commons is, but then you also need someone to collect these rights for you, because if you put it under a Creative Commons license, but no one is collecting for you, or no one is checking, who, you know, like you can even not notice, and it's being used like somewhere else in the world to buy something that is commercial and it is not your intended use for this.
But that's true also for copyrighted music, I think. Okay. Do we? Since you've been friends for 27 years, I imagine that there is something shared in your ideas. Yeah, thanks so much. So, covered a lot of ground here. Maybe I'm going to work backwards. It's easier because that's the things I think, yeah, this non-commercial is like really a bit of a complicated category, because you feel like fellow artists that are on the same level as you, that probably are more happy of them using your work, because you know, even if they'll make a little bit of money of it, they won't make bank. And so in that sense, non-commercial is very broad. Yeah, and it's a limitation for other independent musicians and artists to do something with your work. And yeah, I think that's a real a real problem with this license. And I think it's also what I hear back from also the people, like I spoke with some people from Bye Bye Binary, who made the inclusive typefaces, where they're also thinking a lot about this, because it's they're all very politically engaged in this work, and they're like, well, but what if H&M tomorrow decides they want to pinkwash their campaign and use our typeface on a poster at the bus stop? And it's a real question to which I don't really have a fitting answer yet. But I think if like these licenses, of course, they also evolve. So at least talking to them, I had the impression that they were also thinking about what other kind of license can we make that fits this scenario.
Can I add in? This all makes me think about. You can look at it as the middle way, but I almost want to think of it as another layer of how information is perceived. And so we have the major label scale, which is well, major labels, but also the Coca-Cola and other big corporations that are hardcore for copyright, and it's all in the legal system and so on. And then, like, what came out of that was the independent scene, like with all the independent labels. And at this point, so we have major labels and we also have independent scene. But the independent is also it's also a developed structure at this point. But I feel like what we're also talking about here with the middle ground is almost seeking the maybe even the underground, because what we're talking about that one should be able to create freely, and maybe there is another layer that is going beyond the independent copy left, and this layer is about not giving a shit about any of that and just allowing your creativity to take the front seat. And in order to do this, yeah, you just want to play and have fun and share it with people. So how I'm imagining it is just three different landscapes, and sometimes they meet, like an artist gets picked up by a syncing, and all of a sudden a song is on a Netflix show. So that's a bridging connection. But I think me personally, and more the DIY fashion is maybe seeking more the underground, where people don't want to bother with the bureaucracy of it, and even I don't know, that I feel like that's where the real creativity lies somehow.
I mean, that's not wrong, I think. I mean, that's also what inspired me also these last months. Like, I would go to parties, and I feel that with this like younger generation of DJs, because for a long time, when you had with techno music and industrial music, and especially like minimal techno, you get these artists that become really focused more on like their own sonic palette and trying to really make their own, where it really comes down to the sound that they make. And I feel that there is this current generation that's more, I like this expression, being under the ecstasy of influence. So you'll hear DJs and they switch between genres, and they of course all the 2000 stuff is now back, but like super heavily remixed, and they put some trashy gabber beat in there, and then suddenly the BPM slows down, and we're kind of on a kind of sort of all of a sudden kind of I don't know, it's just, and I was in these parties and I was like, this is amazing, and they clearly don't give a fuck at all about these legal questions. So I agree, but that's probably where a lot of the creativity is, and it's great to be there. And I think there is a real freedom, and we should never forget it, that there is a real freedom of finding a group of people and big speakers and just like and share and travel and voyage. But then there is also the sort of beauty of the fact that of sharing, like I don't know. I think, for example, the song by Lazy Flow, like I found because I was just starting to look through SoundCloud. Like I would find an artist I really like, and I would look who are they following, and then I'm just sort of listening, and then suddenly I came upon these. And that's also, you're right in that a lot of these platforms like SoundCloud, but also Bandcamp, they're full of remixes, of unofficial remixes. And so I think that they have, and it's also the kind of technology we have to check, like Shazam and things like this. They work on a sonic blueprint, which means that if you change the tempo, or even if you put some effects or some EQ, or actually the sort of content check technology that exists. I think Ishana, because he really uses it's the same tempo and it's the same sound, this probably would get picked up by the sort of these kind of algorithms, but a lot of remixes they don't, and I feel like SoundCloud and Bandcamp are not really actively for now, and that is the problem, and that's also made me really sad when I saw that Bandcamp was bought by a huge consortium, which is Epic, which is a part of Tencent, which is I think part Chinese, part American, a huge conglomerate with a huge gaming companies. Because I think a resource like that should be artist owned and not corporation owned. But so there are things possible. The thing is, we never know for how long, because it can always change. But it's like you grab your freedom where you can, I imagine. But then still, as a label or as a musician, it still makes sense to think about like, but hey, what do I keep in these spaces? And what are maybe some things that I can put out and actually have them be on the, and this is like, if you go and listen to a producer's songs they have on Spotify, they are probably not going to be there everything they make, but there are songs that you only hear when you go to the club when they play. And that makes me think that these musicians, they do think about these things. So I think it's kind of maybe this vibe of you're all together at this party is not the only, it's a very important and vital part of cultural transmission that I hope never goes away. But it's also not the only way of cultural transmission, and it is really great if people from like another city that have never been to your party find out about you, and then when they go to Brussels, they know, but I really want to, like, you know, I passed by Paris and I was, I really want to go to this party because there's these people who are playing, and I know about them because there are some things of them online, otherwise I would not have known. Mm-hmm. So I think as musicians and labels, it stays important to think about, okay, you might not want to have everything in the most visible place, but sometimes you need to do something visible as a kind of point of connection also, I think, to other people that might live somewhere else or be.
Can I ask for you, with your book, has your publishing been more taken care of, or how much of bureaucratic work, let's say, is your publishing helping you with, or how much of it are you actively putting out?
I mean, I do, with the publisher is really making sure that I don't have lots of boxes of books in my house, which is pretty great. Like there's a warehouse with books. So I don't do anything related to distribution, which is really like a big relief. And in case of the original publisher, like they have an amazing contact with distributors. So because in book world you have publishers and then distributors, and the publisher, they keep contact with the distributors. And this they did really well. So we made a very like catchy front cover and a catchy title, but then it was the publisher that made sure that the distributors knew about it, and they bought it, and that's how it got in bookshops. And that's something I never ever could have done, and so I'm super grateful for that. And then the other parts of, like, for example, communication, like getting it, like in the case that, for example, the English one, there's very little press, because that's not something that, you know, the publisher was necessarily very good at. If you're watching, I mean, don't blame you. No hard feelings. And now for the French one, for example, because I already made a book once, I had a bit more energy and more ideas. So this time I was like, okay, now we need to find some journalists, and like, but I think it's typical for these smaller art publishers that you end up doing a lot of things yourself, and like a lot of kind of PR, but also the whole legal aspects. They were never worried. They were like, okay, I'm sure Eric will do it without us getting into trouble. I think they put a lot of confidence in me, and this was the same with the French one, where in the end I was just saying like, well, I don't think where the graphic designers, they added a lot of extra images, which was amazing for the most part, but I was also like, no, I think you need to remove that image and that image and that image and that image. So actually I was more on top of the legal part of things, which is not so strange given the subject of the book also. But yeah, that's a bit how it worked for me. But to come back to your, like, what role can the label do, I really do believe that it's really, I think it's very nice what you say, that the label can help with these things, but not just with the legal like the sort of technical aspect of it, but also like bringing people in contact. And there, I just want to add that I think, like you're right, it's really easy for people that are independent to be in touch with each other and reach out and make collaborations. But of course, there's a situation if you're sampling Ed Sheeran, where you're reaching out to a very major label. And here, of course, it's a bit different because you're not in this vibe like, hey, we're all independent and let's have fun, creativity, na. But that doesn't mean that it might not work, because if anything, major labels are always looking for is the next cool thing. So even if you're an independent, they might be like, but this might actually be exactly what our artists need. They want the cool that comes with an independent underground person. But they also might not want it, and that's of course what's the difficult part of it. Once you try and ask permission, the reality of it is that the permission can get turned down. And yeah, that's the part where other artists or labels, they end up being censors. And we're not mad enough about that, I think, because, I don't know, I read a lot about Tracy Chapman, who refused Nicki Minaj to sample her. And everybody was kind of spinning that like a kind of cool story of Tracy Chapman being this principled artist. And I was like, fuck it, no. Like, I mean, it's really cool that Tracy Chapman released these iconic songs in the 90s, but I think it's not her prerogative anymore to control that, because these songs, they are iconic and amazing, but everybody knows these songs. So at some point you have to be able to not micromanage that. And I think there was also a rockist aspect about it, where the one with the acoustic guitar gets more slack than the rapping woman who is extremely talented, but makes the decision that she wants to work with a kind of commercial sound palette, and then that makes her sort of not cool in the eyes of a lot of critics. I think it's kind of the rockist attitude. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, and I'm trying to go through what I wrote down. But yeah, if you decide to sample Ed Sheeran, it might actually work out that the record label is really happy with that, but it might also work out that they say no. Then like SoundCloud, Spotify. Yeah, covers not sounding like the original. Covers is very interesting because I think for a lot of covers, actually they get covered by the rights management societies or the publishing houses. I don't know, like there is one less permission you need to make, because sampling is a lot about some permission of the master, and where it's really this kind of, like as we said yesterday, kind of very liberal, pure offer and demand, like you have to ask and they can ask whatever they want. But a cover, I think, but I mean you're the professionals here, so correct me if I'm wrong, I think in many cases you can actually do it as long as you make sure to pay make sure that the credits are correct, so that the whatever like money that needs to get paid to the composer gets paid to the original composer. And in that sense, but that's maybe also an American situation, so I don't know how that is in Europe or in Portugal, but in that sense there is more creative freedom because you can decide to make the cover and you don't need to ask the original musician if you can make the cover. I don't know, is it like this in Portugal?
I don't know, but if you take that as example, I think was what, Taylor Swift that we were talking about yesterday, that did the covers of her own music and released it. So probably because the label only owned the masters, no? Yeah. And she owned the composing, the composition. So probably is that you take one of the rights out of the way, which is the master. About the master, and I think you only have to ask permission for the composition rights, but I don't know how that works exactly.
But I know, for example, that if you go and play a song in a pub and you play the covers, and I think then you might have to put in your set list or something. But I mean, this is interesting. I mean, would love to know more about it. But I feel for covers there's a bit more freedom because that there are mechanisms in place, which means sure that whenever you'll get compensated for the writing credit, that actually goes to the person who wrote it, but then you do your own version, so you have the rights of the master, they belong to you, but not the writing credits. So there is more, I think with covers, there is a bit more freedom, if I'm not mistaken.
It seems weird for me, because you're playing the same song, no? Yes, so you're copying exactly everything, no?
Oh yeah,
you're free to do you're free to copy if it is alike, but you're not free to copy if it is if you kind of change it, like a sample. You grab a little bit and use it as you please.
Yeah, I mean it's not always logical the way the law evolves, but I think it evolved also really this way, that this sample always has this double permission, and that's also the famous part of the verve. You know, the Bittersweet Symphony. I saw that Nuno, he had it as an example. He didn't show it, but I saw him playing the video. So you have this song called Bittersweet Symphony by the Verve, which has this kind of string section that's looping throughout the song. And actually that comes from an orchestral version of Rolling Stones songs. Yeah. So there was an arranger who made arrangements of famous Rolling Stones songs and played them with the orchestra. And he made the arrangement. So the that's actually just as him who wrote these notes. I imagine that it's maybe the same two chords that are in the Rolling Stones song, but like on the writing level, it has like really little to do with what the Rolling Stones did. So what they did is that they secured permission to use this sound recording, but the actual writing credits for this song, the arranger was not credited for the writing credits, only the Rolling Stones were credited for the writing credits. And they did not ask writing permission. And then when the song came out, when they were already working on the album, they realized, their management realized, oh, we need to ask permission, and they met the manager of the Rolling Stones, who was a like complete, like super tough shark negotiator kind of person. And so this guy sort of, asked around and found out that the record was already finished, that song was the best song on the record, that they had everything in place to release the album. So he's like, okay, this is good to have the best negotiation position possible. So he said, well, I want 100% of the writing credits for this song. And they were like, shit, yeah, we need the album to come out, and okay, you can have 100% of the writing credits of this song. So that's their biggest hit, and you know, the Mick Jagger and Steve and Richards, they wrote nothing on this song. They did nothing for it, but they got, for 20 years, they got all the money. It was like, it's like, and then, like a few years ago, 20 years after the fact, like, and this manager had died in the meantime, and Mick Jagger sort of decided to change the writing credit and to now credit the Verve.
20 years later.
20 years later, which is like, imagine how that must feel. Like for 20 years, you've been struggling, and you know that if they would have done it at the time, you could have led a life of creative freedom and relative comfort, and then you're like 20 years later, you're like, yeah, thanks. So yeah, there's this thing of the master recording that's really particular to the way sampling works. But I would like, actually, for sampling also to be more like covers, that you're just allowed to do it, but you somehow need some kind of mechanism to pay something back. That would be nice, because I think this whole thing where you need to negotiate it, people can say no, and because of kind of market dynamics, the price can go up super high. I think that's not nice. And then you're talking about what can you actually lift from other people, but that's also really interesting that our law system is, I'm watching it, we're good time-wise. Looking at our legal, like, copyright system is also really biased in what you can do and what you cannot do. Like, I think, you know, you can always do a kind of lyrical reference, or there's also things like, for example, rhythms are much less protected than melodies, because you come from these rules come from, these law traditions come from countries with a Western musical tradition where the melody is super important. And so even the most simple, like, I don't know, like the Ed Sheeran is a good example, because it's a super simple little melody, but the melody is really protected by
Was also rhythmical.
Yes, and then the beat comes in, but you could very easily ask a drummer to play the same beat or program the same beat, because of how case law evolved over time in a Western-centric music system, rhythms have almost no protection. And you can also see that in how music works, because, for example, if you listen to reggaeton, then you have always the same beat. That's become, I think, a kind of like which allowed artists then to do all kinds of other things around the beat. But they have this, and it's in a lot of kinds of electronic music. You have a specific kind of beat that allows people to recognize this genre, and I like this genre, and you can keep dancing to the same beat all night. And so reggaeton as a genre is only possible because there is no legal protection for the beat. But at the same time, of course, it feels kind of like off that there is less protection for rhythmic elements, because you know it's also maybe not a complete coincidence that there were all the examples here were more not of white artists that got into trouble, but like so if you have for example, a lot of African musical traditions are much more focused on the percussive elements, and they're actually less protected. So there is a kind of
a lot. You see all the players, all the rock bands from the 50s, 60s, they were copying, they were playing the black people song, R&B songs, they were covering them. They didn't say nothing because they were kind of innocent, but in a way, but it wasn't always normal for players to play other people's music. That always was normal.
Well, in this case, is of course, an evident power imbalance that the people who got copied, they were not the people with the lawyers. So then, So let's see if I have anything more on the list. Oh yeah, so so quotation, Easter eggs. So yeah, you can quote, but not everything is equally quotable. A melody is less easy to quote than a rhythm, and lyrics you can more easily quote because we have in writing a kind of tradition of being able to quote things without getting into too much trouble. And yeah, in the end, what we saw today, time and time again, that the actual sound recording is really hard to quote. Like the sampling, that's just become completely. And of course, you hear a lot of samples in contemporary commercial music, but that's because these people have labels and because it works really well to sample existing. But all the sampling you hear is very unimaginative, like sampling existing hooks from 90s songs, but then there has been the label, and there's lawyers whose job it is to negotiate these things. But as an independent label, that's not something you really have access to, I think. And then, I mean, come back to your remarks about like difference between royalty-free, copyright. It's true that this is really confusing because, for example, I have, of course, graphic design examples, but like if you, for example, you buy a computer and there's typefaces on this computer, you're like, okay, I bought this computer, I have these typefaces. Now I want to put this typeface, I'll make a website and I use this typeface and I put the typeface on the website because, you know, I can. And then it turns out like, hey, wait, when I bought this computer, I got a license to use these typefaces that did not include online use. And these are the kind of things people run into all the time. And so royalty-free, the only thing royalty-free means is that you'll not be asked for payment again and again and again. So the idea is that you normally pay once, and then you can use it, whereas, of course, in many licensing schemes, you pay for a certain amount of use, and then you pay again. So royalty-free means you pay only once. But then you have a specific licensing agreement, so you can use it all the time, but within the confines of the agreement you have. And then it might happen that actually this agreement doesn't cover some of the things you were hoping to do with. And it does sound kind of messed up that you can buy things on a platform and then get these content flags. It sounds really bad. But then I wonder, like, is this kind of like a marketplace? Is this like a peer-to-peer? People upload their samples and you can pay for them? Or is it more like one company that makes these samples?
I think you have both, but I'm not really sure. I'm seeing online more and more people complaining about that because they expect, since they are paying,
Yeah.
they expect to be able to use the samples they download from that platform and from others freely, but that's not the case because maybe they are royalty free, which means they're paying. My question is, you have to pay it once, but you don't know exactly what you're paying for.
Yeah.
The kind of usage you can do with it. And I think a lot of artists don't get this, don't understand actually what they are paying for when they buy a sample. They just see free, so they assume they can do everything with it.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. And what makes me think if they're getting into trouble with this use also is that it might be because they don't have a very good quality control on this. For example, SoundCloud, you can look for the license. So you can search only for Creative Commons licensed music. Now that sounds amazing because you're like, okay, I'm going to put together a video, I want to add music, I'm going to search this. But actually then if you pay a little attention, there's a lot of remixes that are with a Creative Commons license. And then probably the person who made the remix was like, I want to share it, but you still cannot use it because there is like only one part of the layer that is Creative Commons. So because they don't, and if you buy, for example, if you buy a kind of sample pack from usually if you buy like a sample pack from I don't know, from like big company like Ableton or Native Instruments or these kind of companies, you sort of imagine that they have the quality control that whatever samples are in there that you can use them without any problems. But I imagine, or I might be wrong because I don't know this example well, but I imagine what happens is that they've created a kind of sample marketplace, and then the quality control is not so good, and then and then you have these problems happening.
Yeah, it's just a warning for people using to make sure when they download stuff, they read the fine print.
Yeah, for sure.
Because otherwise they could get in trouble.
But I think in most of these companies like Loop Masters or Native Instruments or what's not, and I'm almost sure that the samples are absolutely cleared for any kind of use you want to give them, because that's what the market exists for anyways, not for you to make music and listen to it at home. Is done so you can download stuff that you can work with and publish commercially. So maybe there can be some confusion with some loops that maybe sound like other stuff, but I think in general the sound banks that are being sold, at least by these certified companies, are completely the loops are created specifically for those sound banks. Yeah. They're not recorded from other records or from other sources. They're just created by. So usually you have either an artist that creates a loop pack, a sample pack, or can be the company that makes a kind of compilation of different stuff. But the artist creates that stuff
specifically
on their synths and on their drum machines and stuff, or on real drums or what's not. They record it in studio, they put it online, but was created for that. If it sounds like a bit like something else and it gets caught in the algorithm, it's possible. But I think generally everything is completely prepared.
It was a bit different in the beginning when these CDs came out. I know like the first few Loop Masters CDs that they have, like for example the Ammon break on there and these kind of they did have samples, uncleared samples on them, and then that people got into trouble, and it was also like the reputation suffered of the company. So then I think now they try to be very kosher about it.
Yeah, but it's basically happening the same with this company, because in some cases some artists made the loops, they are selling them in that marketplace, and the people that download don't own the rights. The actual artist owns the rights. And
the person that uploads doesn't own the rights.
Yeah. So if I'm using that service and I download the sample, I don't have the rights to do everything with it, because the original sample was uploaded from another author. Yeah. So it's like a messed up kind of approach to this. And if you search on YouTube, you see a lot of people complaining their music is being blocked on YouTube because they're using spliced samples. It's crazy. Okay. I don't know the underlying issues, but it's just a warning.
But I find it a super interesting case, and I imagine that it has to do with the peer-to-peer nature of it, and it's similar also to like you have free typeface sites like Dafont and things that also don't have necessarily super good control about these things. But then it maybe. But it's true that this whole industry of sample packs, sometimes it's a bit depressing, because it's a bit like we saw in the beginning with, you say like, yes, and we got the original na-na equipment and we did the original na-na thing, and it's like, it would be nice to get a bit of this serendipity back of sampling just a crazy record you find somewhere on a flea market. But I'm also completely agreeing with you. Or that's maybe a nostalgic way of seeing it. But maybe what's also interesting to go to platforms like archive.org or Wikimedia Commons, because they are about sharing. So they tend to be much more transparent. And then I'm like, okay, for example, when I saw this video on how to make this like Portishead kind of sample, like, and make it sound like as if you sampled like an orchestral soul record from the 70s, you can actually, for example, go to archive.org and find records from the 40s. So you cannot find records from the 70s because they're too young, but you can find records from the 40s, and these are in the public domain, and these you can sample. So if you get interested in these questions, because I think that's also the problem we're talking about, is people, they're not interested in the legal part of it. But if you get interested in the legal part, you can also find actually some nice and quirky ways of going about things. Like you can, and then you find out, or there is, like field recordings, it's like you did in the project here, there's actually online repositories of field recordings where people, because they're into this mindset of sharing, I think that's an important difference, because they're into this mindset of sharing, they're also more clear and transparent about, okay, I recorded this here, and it comes from here, and this year, and it's under a Creative Commons license because, or you go to archive.org and they explain for everything. They say, okay, so this music was composed in this time and we released it in 1940, and so that means that it's in the public domain. And then, of course, you cannot sample the exact same things, but at least, you can get some of this sort of serendipity and influence back in your composition process, I think.
Well, can I ask, do you know, or can you explain more how exactly archive.org actually functions? I recently discovered it, and it's great. But I wonder if it's fully legal. But it really seems to be. And I know that some books I've been mostly using it for books, and some of them you can rent, some you can buy, some you can just download for free. But one I downloaded for free was like costed 40 euros on Amazon, I saw. Yeah. So how would this work legally?
So archive.org is related to the Internet Archive, and I've been there in San Francisco, and it's amazing. Like it's this, I don't know, it's these it's a very typical. It's very so it's basically some person who made it big with selling their company in the dot-com boom, and then they decided to dedicate their lives to this. And it's also this sort of American atheist sort of vibe, where they and atheist but scientistic, so really believing in science. So what they did is that they built an old church, and that was desacralized, and they put in, and now in all the vaults there are servers. And they put some mathematical formulas on the wall, because they're like, oh, science is better than religion or something kind of. So it's a really crazy place, and you can have a guided tour. They do one every week, and then there's just all these servers. So it's kind of like they made their own religion in a way. And but it's an amazing initiative, because they started with archiving the internet, and of course, there was not real legal, and of course, you could say that goes against copyright, because you're copying things. So they download what they can of the internet all the time, and they work on an opt-out basis. Like you can say, like, okay, I want my stuff removed, and they remove it. So that's a very important thing they do, because a lot of things they are gone from the internet. You can still find them there. And then from there, I think they just started like, okay, we're downloading the internet. Can we not like sort of stock the entirety of human knowledge? Like there's a lot of books that are not yet on the internet. Maybe we also need these books. And there's lots of records that have never been digitized. Maybe we need to digitize them. And then they started to push the legal limit for things. So for music, I think everything is more or less legally pretty sound, because they have either public domain things, or there are net labels that themselves have decided to license their work under a Creative Commons license. So I think for music, those are the two main contents. So I think it's a very interesting resource for musicians. Like of the net label stuff, not all of it is under some of it is non-commercial, but a lot of it is you can use in your compositions. And then they started with this whole thing of libraries started throwing their books away, and they were like, no, we need to keep these books like shared resource for humanity. And they were like, well, we can maybe already start scanning them, like why not? And then they at some point they were like, okay, but we're going to be a library, because if we're a library, then we can sort of lend out books. And so they made a system where only one person at a time can read it. But But I think now they're getting into trouble because I think here they just started to go over the edge of what was really. They thought, I think they were like, okay, this should probably work, and maybe it doesn't. Like they're having lawsuits at this moment. So if you feel like, whoa, this is too good to be true, maybe it is too good to be true. Sadly, it's like Sci-Hub. Like Sci-Hub was like, wow, and then Sci-Hub like is an example for me where I'm like, I was hoping that it would just stay online. Like for example, the Pirate Bay, you can still find the Pirate Bay if you're looking for the Pirate Bay, but Sci-Hub you can still find it, but it's no longer adding new articles. So if you want a scientific article from before 2020, you can find it, but some kind of sad. But yeah, for musicarchive.org is a great resource. I just hope it doesn't go away because of lawsuits and things.
There should be like a whole network of projects like archive.org. Probably there is.
There is, and there is also an interesting, I think there's a subreddit. I don't go on there because I don't want to be a data hoarder myself. I feel I might be liable to be a data hoarder. So there's a Reddit called Data Hoarders, and it's all about people just downloading lots of stuff, thinking that it might go away from the internet. At least I have it. And there is a saying that's nothing beats the bandwidth of a car driving down a highway filled with hard drives. Like so, I don't remember who said that, but there's still also kind of like an offline data. So maybe when intellectual property gets a bit more flexible, there's people who come out of their caves with their hard drives and say like, yeah, I downloaded the entire museum of Aveiro, and here it is.
Can I ask for your opinion?
Sure.
Oh no, I don't want to lose my thought.
Can the world hear it?
Huh? No. So, I mean, we have been talking about this since yesterday, and you have been sharing your opinion, of course, a lot. You were saying that you don't feel very optimistic about how we're going with the intellectual property and copywriting. How do you see the landscape being in 10 years? Or in, I don't know, 50 years? Yeah.
Well, I don't know, like as an individual human being, I try to love and party and enjoy myself. But as a, taking and also to contribute what little I can in positive energy and sustainable living. But I don't know. Anyway, I think the world is going to bits. So I think maybe intellectual property is not the biggest of our problems. No, I mean it's just like I feel that there is because we live in this. I remember when it was the pandemic and everybody was saying like, oh, it's so great, we'll find more local alternatives and we'll like be friends again and production will delocalize, and I was like, fuck no, that was no way that's going to happen. Like, we just had empty planes flying over. Like, it's the so copyright is part of our globalized trade order of where capital is the thing that rules everything, and yeah, I don't know. Seems to be gotten in my lifetime. Things seem to have gotten worse rather than better. So like, I mean, so much more possibility of sharing, and actually the rules keep getting tougher. So no, I'm not optimistic, but I try to have a lot of fun in the meantime. Like, I don't know. Maybe this is not. I mean, I cannot But I just think for sure things will change, like for sure. But if I'm not thinking what will change with copyright, I'm just thinking like, okay, we'll go through environmental disaster. I'm not a collapsologist. I don't think the human race will go extinct or whatever. But we're going through some kind of we're going through a time of ecocide and wealth. Huge wealth differences, so probably I imagine at some point we'll have all this social unrest will somehow make it that our world will change. Maybe we will get more into totalitarian system, or maybe one can hope we will find a way to be nicer and friendlier with each other and other kinds of societies. But I think that's the kind of, you need social change, I think, before you'll have copyright change. We need to be in another system which is not a system run by capital. I started to feel really like a kind of, it was yesterday, it was already the same thing. Like I think it's hanging in France where people like to torch down McDonald's or something. I think we've been spending a week in France. I get in this vibe of, I don't know. But yeah, no, I don't think copyright will change before our world economy will change. Like, there's no way. There's too much invested. So I don't think like how should copyright change? Well, I used to be like, okay, I think we need fair use in Europe. We need like maybe more easier ways to license things, and so yeah, I would have some concrete ideas, but to be honest, I really think like the way our society functions need to change before we will change how copyright functions, because they're just too much intertwined.
It's not the first masterclass in this program that ends with the fall of capitalism, and I hope it's not the last too. So yeah, thanks a lot, Eric. And I don't know if anyone has anything else to add, but we kind of have to, have a little break. For next one is coming soon. You want to add something else?
I was very happy to. Yesterday was in this amazing space. It feels like all these spaces, they bring an extra like a spirit of the place with them, and I feel again I was in an amazing space with amazing people, and thank you so much for making this moment happen.
Thank you.